American Wood Council would like to welcome you to today's live learning event. We have exciting news and have migrated to a new learning portal. For those who have already accessed the portal, we hope you are enjoying the experience so far. We do have a few remaining tasks to improve your experience, but rest assured, we are working on these improvements daily. Our lawyers make us say this, but this webinar is designed to provide general information and does not constitute professional or engineering advice. Today's session is registered with the American Institute of Architects, AIA. Credits will be reported automatically for anyone who has provided their AIA number at registration. Now we would like to welcome you to our webinar, Advancing Environmental Transparency for Wood Products. This presentation is registered with the AIA for 1 LU HSW and for 0.1 credits with the ICC. To receive credit for this course, you must attend the webinar for a minimum of 50 minutes. At the end of the 50 minutes, you will see your certificate appear on your console. Your certificate will also be in your learner profile within 1 day on learn.awc.org. At the end of today's presentation, our presenter will go live with a Q&A from the audience. Please input your questions into the Q&A panel throughout the session. And without further delay, today's presenter, Anna Ostrander, LCA Data Specialist with the American Wood Council. Thank you, Anna.
Hello, everyone. I'm Anna Ostrander, LCA Data Specialist at the American Wood Council. As a quick introduction, I've been at AWC for a little over a year now, and before joining AWC, I completed my master's degree at the School for Environment and Sustainability at the University of Michigan. As LCA Data Specialist at AWC, I manage our lifecycle database and coordinate projects using manufacturing data for lifecycle assessments and environmental product declarations. It's a pleasure to be part of this really great team of dedicated people, and I'm excited to share with you all about some of the work we've been doing specifically on the AWC Markets and Sustainability team. So thanks for joining us today to learn about how we are working to advance environmental transparency for wood products. If you're watching this, perhaps you've already read the course description, but for those who haven't, the built environment is responsible for nearly 40% of annual global greenhouse gas emissions. In order to avoid the worst climate change scenarios, rapid decarbonization is needed in all sectors. Wood products present a right now solution to this challenge, as they are significantly lower in embodied carbon than other conventional building materials, and when sourced from sustainably managed forests, provide numerous environmental benefits. This webinar will walk through the sustainability story of U.S. wood products and show the work we're doing to tell the story transparently through data and EPDs. So in other words, this webinar is about the need to decarbonize our built environment, the solution that wood products offer to this challenge, and what we as a sector are doing to tell our sustainability story through data. By the end of this presentation, you should gain an understanding of how wood products benefit the climate and environment. You should also learn how AWC uses data and LCA to demonstrate the low embodied carbon nature of wood products, as well as learn about different types of wood sourcing sustainability assurances and ways to track where wood products originate. And finally, learn about our efforts to expand our reach even further to include data for all U.S. wood products. So quickly before we dive in, some background on what the American Wood Council is and what we do. We are the leading trade association for the structural wood products industry in the United States, representing about 87% of U.S. structural wood products. Our industry employs over 450,000 people in wood manufacturing jobs and also supports additional jobs in forestry and related sectors, with our members making products like lumber, plywood, OSB, and mass timber, and many others. We use data, science, and technical expertise to ensure a resilient, safe, and sustainable built environment, and advocate for working forests and wood products as a solution for reducing carbon in the built environment. AWC is actively engaged in the development of building codes and standards, as well as policies that help establish wood products as the most viable and sustainable material for our built environment. For example, because of the work that AWC has done in the code space, tall mass timber buildings are allowed by the 2021 International Building Code, which was a really transformational change for wood products. Among AWC's strategic plan goals are enhanced acceptance of wood products through development of building codes, fire service engagement, environmental regulatory work, advocacy, and climate-related policy. So at AWC, we truly believe wood is the leading solution for our built environment. As I just mentioned, AWC does many different things, and among these is our focus on environmental sustainability. In recent years, AWC has expanded its efforts in carbon and sustainability, as well as in advocacy. And we are some of the national thought leaders in these areas. We recently finalized a strategic plan with specific goals and objectives related to climate and sustainability. Our sustainability priorities are, first off, to operate transparently through development and management of a life cycle inventory database for industry data that has widespread participation, is updated annually, and can be used to support development of environmental product declarations, life cycle assessment reporting, and advocacy on climate-related policies. And number two, to advocate for thoughtful policies and programs that drive wood use, are based on robust science and data, are inclusive of industry and stakeholder feedback, and that align with AWC's climate and carbon principles. Number three, to take a leading role in coordinating with the entire forest sector to leverage messaging and advocacy on climate-related policies and ensure our fiber sourcing website is up to date with accurate forest level information that supports the sustainability story of American wood products. And finally, to expand coalition building and educate broadly through our work with environmental NGOs, LCA tool developers, and other associations with whom we share the latest and most accurate wood products data and describe the unique climate benefits wood products offer the built environment. So our sustainability goals really seek to maximize the opportunities for wood products and initiatives that seek to reduce, avoid, and sequester carbon emissions in the built environment. It goes without saying that climate change is already impacting every part of our world with increasing severity, and there are countless advocates, NGOs, business leaders, governments, projects, and initiatives pushing for solutions to this massive problem. The most recent report from the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change stated that in the near term, every region in the world is projected to face increased climate hazards with risks to natural ecosystems and humans, and hazards like food and vector-borne diseases, sea level rise, biodiversity loss, food and water scarcity, landslides, heavy rainfall will become more frequent and intense. The take-home message from this big long quote is that it's not looking good. And unless we find effective solutions fast, our planet is on a pretty scary trajectory. While all of this is disheartening, wood products are a source of hope as we look ahead to expanding populations and the need to house people coupled with the continued constraints of climate change. So in the rest of this presentation, I will tell you why. To narrow in our focus a bit, buildings are one major culprit in the climate change problem. The built environment accounts for almost 40% of global annual greenhouse gas emissions. By 2050, our global population is projected to reach almost 10 billion people, 2/3 of which will be living in urban areas. With this rise in population and increased urbanization, we expect to add a New York City's worth of buildings every month for the next 40 years. That's a lot of buildings. Acknowledging the need to make huge changes and change course to avoid the worst climate projections, the US has set goals to reduce emissions by 50% below the 2005 baseline by 2030, reach net zero emissions by 2050, and scale up CO2 removal strategies. Knowing the challenge we face and the amount of emissions the building sector is currently contributing to the problem, and the goals that the US has to address this problem, it's clear that the building sector needs a low carbon, right now solution. The good news is that we have one, and by building more buildings with wood, the built environment could actually be a climate solution instead of a problem. So before I get too far into the details, I want to clarify a few terms and definitions for anyone who is unfamiliar. Carbon sequestration and carbon storage are terms often used interchangeably, but they're actually not quite the same thing. When we talk about carbon sequestration, we're referring to the actual process of capturing CO2 and converting it, in the case of a tree, into carbon fiber through photosynthesis. Carbon storage is referring to the amount of carbon contained or stored in a tree or wood product for its lifetime. In other words, sequestration is the active process of taking CO2 out of the air, and storage is the keeping of that carbon in a substance for some amount of time. I also wanted to clarify another term that comes up a lot in carbon or greenhouse gas accounting, but is sometimes not very well understood. Biogenic carbon, in simple terms, is non-fossil carbon, or carbon found in biological or living materials. For us in the wood products industry, when we talk about biogenic carbon, we're referring to the carbon sequestered by a tree as it grows that continues to be stored in a wood product for its lifetime. This is what we mean when we say wood stores carbon or emits it at the end of its life. In a life cycle assessment, per the standard ISO 21930, biogenic carbon entering a product system can be characterized with a factor of -1 if the wood originated from sustainably managed forests. And then at the end of the product's life, that carbon that was stored must be represented with a factor of +1. I say all of this just to clarify what kind of carbon we're talking about when we say wood stores carbon. Another term I wanted to touch on up front is embodied carbon. When we talk about buildings, embodied carbon is the emissions associated with the materials used in the building. This includes the emissions associated with extraction of the raw materials used to manufacture a building material, the emissions that come from the manufacturing process, and the transport of these materials. This is distinct from operational carbon, which is often a big focus in discussions about built environment emissions and should be, but that has to do with building energy consumption and emissions during the use phase of a building, not the materials themselves used to build the building. Now that we've defined some essential terms, let's go back to wood products and the benefits they provide. Wood is approximately 50% carbon by dry weight. As I mentioned in the previous slide, this comes from CO2 sequestered from the atmosphere that is stored as carbon in wood fiber. Wood is a naturally grown building material that not only stores carbon, but also has lower embodied carbon from extraction and manufacturing emissions than other conventional building materials. So considering these benefits together, this low embodied carbon and the stored carbon, wood products often have a net negative CO2 value. So as I just mentioned, wood stores carbon, and that is one of the huge environmental benefits of wood products. But wood is also sustainable in other ways. It uses mostly renewable energy in its manufacturing process. And this is because most wood product mills use woody biomass to fuel their operations. For example, the North American lumber industry is over 50% energy self-sufficient meaning it uses its own wood residues or byproducts to fuel its operations. And another facet of the inherent sustainability of wood products, which is kind of tied to the second point, is their low waste. On average, US sawmills use 99% of the logs that come into the facility. Byproducts like chips or bark are used for energy generation at the mill or sold to the market, so very little is wasted. Of course, we can't talk about wood products and the benefits they provide without talking about forests. So in a nutshell, what this graphic shows is that forests remove carbon from the atmosphere as they grow. And eventually trees die and release their stored carbon back into the atmosphere. Harvesting some of the trees from forests locks that carbon into wood products that store it for decades or even centuries, while new trees are replanted and continue to sequester carbon as they grow. Markets for forest products keep this cycle going and help avoid conversion of forests into other uses. And actively managing forests makes them more resilient to things like wildfire and pests. And harvests are actually a very small portion of US forest land. In the US, forest stocks have been stable or increasing since the early 1900s. And currently only 2% of working forests in the US are actually harvested each year, all of which is replanted. So the takeaway about US forestry and US wood products is that they are not causing deforestation. As a quick aside, I used to be one of those people with the mentality that caring about the environment meant being a tree hugger and hating the thought of cutting down a tree. I remember driving through rural Pennsylvania as a kid and seeing a truck full of logs and just feeling so sad at the thought of trees being cut down. But when I started to learn about the ways that using wood products and actively managing forests in a sustainable way actually benefits our forests and our climate, and when I started to meet the people who have been harvesting and replanting trees and manufacturing wood products for generations, it became pretty hard for me to see wood products as this harmful, evil thing. And we have data to back this up. So a few more terms before we get into that data. Life cycle assessment, or LCA, is the compilation and evaluation of the inputs, outputs, and potential environmental impacts of a product throughout its life cycle. In other words, it's quantifying everything that goes into and comes out of a product system and analyzing its impacts on the environment, such as greenhouse gas emissions, energy use, and waste. Life cycle inventory is a key step in an LCA, and it's the phase that involves creating an inventory of input and output flows for the system. In other words, LCI is the data collection component of an LCA. ISO, or the International Organization for Standardization, is the organization that basically sets the rules for LCA. ISO standards are internationally developed and agreed upon by experts from around the world, and standards cover a wide range of activities, from making a product, managing a process, delivering a service, or supplying materials. ISO describes standards kind of like a formula that describes the best way of doing something. This slide lists the ISO standards most relevant to the work that we're doing with life cycle data for wood products, including the general principles and framework for LCA, guidelines for LCA, rules for developing EPDs, and the specific requirements for construction product EPDs. Another important term is PCR, or product category rules. These are the requirements for a specific type of product, for instance, structural wood products, that govern what must be included in an LCA and reported in an environmental product declaration. And PCRs also must follow the ISO standards described in the previous slide. So the top image here is the PCR for building-related products and services in North America. And in our world, it's commonly referred to as the Part A. It's the general rules that apply to a broad range of building materials. The bottom image is the Part B PCR for building-related products and services, and it's specifically giving the requirements for structural wood product EPDs. So this is the document that governs our EPD process. An environmental product declaration, or EPD, is a standardized document based on the applicable PCR, which is based on ISO standards, that discloses a product's environmental impact. EPDs are based on LCA results with the goal of informing stakeholders or consumers about the environmental impacts of a product. Basically, an EPD is a summary report of an LCA, or some people like to call them nutrition labels for environmental impacts of products. EPDs are becoming more and more common in the sustainability and AEC communities as people want to minimize their environmental footprints and want to ensure that the products they are specifying and procuring in their buildings are sustainable. And there are already lots of policies and regulations popping up, as well as funding with agencies like the Environmental Protection Agency offering millions of dollars in funding for manufacturers to develop and publish EPDs in coming years. So EPDs are a pretty big deal. According to ISO 21930, the standard that governs EPDs for construction products, the life cycle stages that must be included in an EPD are stages A1 through A3. So A1 is the raw material extraction. A2 is the transport of those raw materials to the manufacturing facility. And A3 is the actual manufacture at the facility of construction materials. The LCA community, or those familiar with EPDs, often refer to these three stages together as cradle to gate. For wood products, A1 means forestry, which includes logging operations, site preparation, and forest management, as well as all the equipment and processes that go into harvesting the trees. And then A2 is the transport of the logs and other materials to the manufacturing site or the mill. A3 includes everything that goes on at the mill, including debarking and cutting of a log, drying it to the necessary moisture content, planing, sanding, assembling, and packaging it. And the complete life cycle of a wood product includes everything from forest management through production and use to final disposal, which would be called cradle to grave. However, since the use and disposal phases can vary a lot depending on a range of factors, A1 through A3 are the stages that are required and included in EPDs. And this is the same for other building materials. Other building material EPDs are also usually cradle to gate in scope. So as I said, EPDs are becoming increasingly widespread in policies and in the market as companies and consumers seek to better understand their environmental impacts and collectively make lower carbon purchasing decisions. The wood product sector is doing our part to participate in this movement toward greater transparency about environmental impacts, and we actually see this as an opportunity because we believe US wood products have a really good story to tell. So how is AWC using LCA and EPDs to tell that sustainability story? So first I'll tell you about the AWC Lifecycle Survey. AWC has developed an online data collection platform that gathers mill-level LCI data from our member companies. The manufacturing data collected in the survey is then used in LCAs and summarized in EPDs. Our vision for the survey is that it becomes a central point for the entire industry's environmental data, which will allow for more efficient and robust analysis and reporting moving forward. The data collected in our survey and the resulting EPDs is extremely valuable for providing trends, benchmarking for improvements, assessing our impacts and influencing policies, and ultimately telling the great sustainability story of U.S. wood products. So the primary data being collected in this survey is this mill-level manufacturing data, which includes all of the inputs and outputs involved with production of their products. When a user fills out a survey, they must report the material inputs, transportation of those materials, energy use data, products and byproducts produced, processes and equipment used, water use and wastewater, and all waste outputs. And in the coming slides, I'll dive into a few of these categories in more detail using an example lumber mill survey. So here we see the products tab of the survey, where this mill must report the primary product produced in the facility, in this case, construction grade lumber, as well as any byproducts or co-products made in the process. For each product and byproduct, a user must report the annual quantity and the average moisture content of each material, which is essential information for the mass balance done in an LCA. And note that users must also report what they do with their byproducts made at the mill, whether they are sold externally or used internally for energy generation or some other purpose. So the aim of this survey is to track all the material and energy flows in the manufacturing process so that we can use really robust data for life cycle assessments. Here's the energy tab of the survey, where mills must also report all their energy use, including electricity and any fossil fuels used in manufacturing processes, such as gasoline to power transport equipment. As I mentioned earlier, many manufacturers get a large portion of their energy from biomass. So here they must also report any wood fuels used and whether they were self-generated, coming from their own byproducts made in the mill or purchased from another source. And then this is the input materials tab for a lumber mill. So it's pretty straightforward since the main input is logs. But if you look on the right side of the slide, you'll see the log input window, which has several required data fields. Users must report the annual quantity of their logs used, their average moisture content, the log scaling rule used, the average log diameter, and the transportation mode and distance from the source forest. And some wood products have more complex manufacturing processes and may require many more inputs like resins and wax and other materials. So those would also be reported on this page. And then mills must also report any packaging that goes on their final products. So once we've gotten all that information and mills have submitted their surveys detailing annual manufacturing data, it's time to actually do the life cycle assessment of the data. After doing a thorough QA/QC, which often involves following up with mills and correcting any missing or incorrect numbers, the survey database generates production-weighted averages for all of the data fields. And AWC partners with the Consortium on Research for Renewable Industrial Materials, or CORM. And CORM is a group of researchers from over a dozen organizations with decades of experience in wood product LCAs. Through an MOU with AWC, CORM will use the aggregated data from the survey to conduct life cycle assessments that will ultimately be summarized and published as EPDs. This past spring, AWC completed data collection for the 2021 manufacturing year, and our survey is currently open and collecting data for the 2022 manufacturing year. And then moving forward, data collection will always fall on this cycle of August through December. So with the first round of data we collected for the 2021 manufacturing year, we'll be publishing the updated regional EPDs for softwood lumber. And those should be published by mid-2024. Other wood products are in process and will also be updated with data from the survey. I also wanted to note that in the coming year, we are working on a project with a USDA Wood Innovations grant that we received that will allow us to expand the database to include all US wood product manufacturers, opening the survey beyond just AWC membership to include all wood product manufacturing associations across the US. So this will be a really significant move to incorporate LCI data from the vast majority of wood manufacturers in the country, which will improve the robustness of our data and make our EPDs even more representative of the entire industry. If you'd like to see our current industry-wide EPDs for wood products, you can find them at awc.org/sustainability. So these are all of the EPDs that we manage. Another project concurrent with the life cycle survey work we're doing is AWC's wood sourcing tool, which is focused on the supply chain and upstream sourcing of wood fiber. The standard ASTM D7612 sets forth the criteria for using different systems and certifications to ensure sustainability in wood supply. The different types of sustainability assurances fit into 3 categories: non-controversial, responsible, and certified. So non-controversial means the wood comes from a legal source of forest products. In the US, where there's a strong rule of law around forestry with laws that protect water quality and endangered species, this category alone is already ensuring that wood comes from good practices and is not coming from deforestation or illegal logging. Responsible, the next category, means wood fiber is acquired according to an independently certified responsible procurement system, or is harvested from regions with regulatory systems in place to implement forestry best management practices. This is a really strong assurance that wood is sourced using practices that protect forests and protect the air and water that flows through and around them. And through a certified procurement system for responsible sourcing, the mills have a system in place to document and ensure that their logs are coming from forests that comply with these forestry best management practices. And finally, certified means wood fiber is sourced from forests that are independently certified according to a sustainable forest management program, such as the Sustainable Forestry Initiative, Forest Stewardship Council, American Tree Farm System, or a program for the endorsement of forest certification. And these certification systems are mechanisms for monitoring forestry practices and tracing and labeling forest products. So AWC's life cycle survey also collects mill-level data on these 3 categories of fiber sourcing assurances. It's non-controversial, responsible, and certified. So beyond the LCI data that I described, which is used for EPDs, a mill is also required to declare how much of their fiber comes from each of these 3 sourcing categories. And then the fiber sourcing data that we collect in the survey is anonymized and averaged for each region of the US. And these numbers then feed into a separate tool AWC has developed called the wood sourcing tool. This tool answers the question, how can I tell if wood is sustainably sourced? It presents regional fiber sourcing data as well as numerous forestry facts and answers to several frequently asked questions about forestry and sustainability. So here's a glimpse of the home screen of the tool, which prompts a user to enter either the grade stamp on their product or a region of interest, and both will bring up a sourcing region where the wood mill is located. In this example, I selected the Western US as my region of interest, and here are the results. Aggregated data from the survey shows that for the average mill in the US West, 100% of its wood fiber is from non-controversial or legal sources. 95% is from responsible sources, and 56% is from certified forests. Within each category, there's an explanation of what the category means and why it's a significant assurance of sustainability. And then the page also shows the different ownership types in that region. So who owns the forests in that region? And in the West, around 65% of forests are publicly owned, and then 18% are owned by family landowners, 15% corporate, and 3% tribal ownership. And next to that ownership graph, we see that only 8% of all forests in this region have a forest management certification. That's that SFI or FSC forest management certification that I mentioned. This is significant because it provides a bit of an explanation for why mills don't have more certified wood. And it's because there's not a lot of certified wood available. That's only 8% of forests in that entire region. And the low availability of certified wood can be largely explained by the different ownership types. So public forests, which is 65% of forests in the West, are generally not managed according to an independent certification. And for small family landowners, which is 18%, there are often barriers to certification, such as high costs. But again, we really want to emphasize with this tool that non-controversial and responsible are both strong assurances of sustainability and wood supply. And we hope this tool offers some clarification around these different categories. All three of these categories in the US ensure that wood harvesting and forestry operations are done in ways that protect forests and the species that live in them, and the air and water quality around them. And then here are some examples of the regional forestry facts, such as state-specific information about carbon storage and land ownership, as well as some of the frequently asked questions the site addresses, such as the carbon impacts of forestry practices, climate smart forestry, and do wood harvest cause deforestation, many other topics you can explore. So we think this is a really transformative tool and the first of its kind, and has tons of very useful information for people purchasing or building with wood, or just for anyone interested in knowing more about wood sourcing and the sustainability of our sector. So if you're interested in the tool and want to explore it more, you can find it at awc.org/wood-sourcing. By now, I hope I've made you a believer in the idea that wood products are a climate solution. To summarize, wood is 50% carbon by dry weight. It comes from a natural material that sequesters carbon as it grows. Wood stores carbon for its lifetime, which is often a very long one. Wood can substitute for higher embodied carbon materials like steel and concrete, especially with innovations in mass timber products. Wood provides benefits to both humans and nature, with benefits I didn't even mention, such as biophilia, which is humanity's innate love for and connection with natural beauty, where studies have shown that there are emotional and physical benefits to working or studying or living in wood buildings. And then markets for wood products benefit forests by keeping forests as forests and avoiding conversion to some other land use, and even by lowering the risk of wildfire, which often occurs in these dense, overstocked, unmanaged forests. Wood products are low in embodied carbon and high in stored carbon, and they really are the solution the built environment needs right now. I wanted to end this presentation with another quote from the IPCC. And this is the United Nations body for assessing the science related to climate change. The IPCC acknowledges the important role forests and forest products play in the fight against climate change, saying in the long term, a sustainable forest management strategy aimed at maintaining or increasing forest carbon stocks while producing an annual sustained yield of timber, fiber, or energy from the forest will generate the largest sustained mitigation. It's been a pleasure to talk to you about this important work we're doing to advance environmental transparency for wood products. And I'd love to answer any questions you may have.
All right, Anna, thank you so much for such an informative presentation. So we do have some questions from our learners today. Our first question is, can I look at the data that companies are submitting into the survey that AWC is doing?
Great question. So the answer is no. Security and confidentiality is a really high priority for us and for our member companies. So there's a screening process for creating an account and logging into the survey. I have to approve a user of the survey. And then once you're in, you only have access to your specific assigned facility or company. So if you're a mill level user, you can only see your mill's data. And if you're a company level user, you can see all of the mills in your company, but no other company's data. And then even in the LCA reports and the EPDs, the published data from the survey is aggregated at a regional level. So nothing is divulged that would allow people to associate data with a specific company or mill.
Okay, all right, thank you. All right, another question. How is forest management accounted for in the survey and EPDs?
Yeah, so in the survey, as I mentioned, we ask for information about log transportation with questions about how far the logs traveled and what regions the logs came from, as well as the log species used in the mill. And then we also have the fiber sourcing questions, which ask for the percent of logs from those different fiber sourcing categories. And that feeds into the wood sourcing tool. But as far as EPDs, forest management is included in the scope, and all but it doesn't come from the AWC survey. So EPDs include results from forestry activities like thinning, fertilization, harvesting, replanting, even growing of the seedlings in a nursery. But that information comes from the regional LCA reports done by Quorum, and those reports have more detailed information about the A1 stage, and then they get their A1 data from previously published LCA reports on specifically on forestry impacts at a regional level, and those are publicly available on Quorum's website.
Okay, great. All right, another question that we've got. How does the survey collect data about impacts from the A4 phase?
Yeah, so there are optional fields and required fields in the survey. So because the requirements for EPDs are A1 through A3, we don't require users to submit information about A4, but it is an option if they want to tell us if they know where their products are going specifically. But separately, we're working on an A4 tool at AWC, which is a project we've been developing that's aimed at developing regional A4 estimates using state level production data and primary shipping data from from our member companies. And then these give like regional emissions estimates based on probabilities. And we've done that so far with lumber, and we're finalizing the results for plywood, OSB, and I-joist. And eventually we'll get to all of the other products.
Someone wants to know, how often do your EPDs get updated? Bless you.
Thanks. How often the EPDs get updated? So EPDs are required to be updated every 5 years. So currently our EPDs that are published on our website expire in July of 2025. And we're working on updating all of those EPDs in the next couple of years, so well before that deadline. And right now we're starting with the softwood lumber EPD, which we're aiming to publish by mid-2024, and that's using data from the life cycle survey.
Okay. Someone wants to know, the homepage of the wood sourcing tool also has an option to enter the mill grade stamp number. What does this mean?
So the mill grade stamp number is just another way to get to that regional breakdown of the different sustainability assurances. So it will still take you to a region, but instead of entering that specific region, you can enter the grade stamp that you'd find on your wood product, say a piece of lumber. It will have a grade stamp that indicates things like the quality and strength, but also what mill it came from. So you can trace whatever mill it came from to that region and learn more about the forestry impacts in that region.
Great. Another question we got is, how does the data from the survey get to the LCA practitioner?
Good question. So the data from the survey gets aggregated on a regional basis. And we've been working with a tech firm called Pioneer Technologies, who we've kind of had to translate what quorum needs in order to do the LCAs with the data into the coding language that needs to actually get it from the survey website. So all of that will be built into the back end of the website. They can automatically do the regional production weighted averages, so that when the data comes to quorum in a spreadsheet, it's already been QA/QC'd and normalized and aggregated. So yeah, hope that answers that question.
Yeah. Okay, I think we just have time for a couple more questions here. How is forest certification captured in the AWC survey and EPDs?
So again, I mentioned the fiber sourcing tab that asks about those forest certification percentages from the mill, how much of their wood comes from certified forest. So forest certification is not required to be incorporated in EPDs. It's not required by the ISO standard or the PCR, but it is an option. It's listed in the PCR as like additional environmental information. So if that information is available, and I think it would be more applicable to like a product specific EPD or a company specific EPD, because they would know exactly how much of their wood is certified versus a whole region. It's kind of hard to give that forest level information for, but it is optional, so it's not a required part of an EPD.
Okay, and this might be our last question, but this is a good one. Someone asked, concrete has thousands of EPDs. Why do wood products have so few?
Yeah, so There are a lot of things that make wood different than concrete. Their supply chains and production processes are very different. And I am not an expert by any means on concrete, but the way I understand it, it's kind of like a batch system where it's a formula of this amount of ingredients and you mix it all together in a batch. Whereas for wood, there's just so many little differences depending on the region and the wood species and the mill and what the practices that go on in the mill and the different equipment used. There's so many variables that it takes a lot of work and time and information gathering to normalize all of that data and get it to where it's ready to be used in an LCA and published as an EPD. So I guess that's why I would say we don't have 50,000 EPDs right now for wood products. That being said, that's an eventual goal, is to develop an automated EPD generator like concrete has, where you can just enter your information and pop out an EPD. That would be great, but we're getting there.
All right. Anna, thank you so much. This was so informative. And that was our last question. That was the last one we had time for. So I want to thank everyone for attending today's webinar with the American Wood Council. Our next webinar will be December 12th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, titled Introduction to ANSI AWC FDS 2024. So we hope to see you at our next live learning webinar. Have a great day.
Thanks.
Thank you.